This is the Brandon Smith Show, and the entire purpose of the show is one singular thing, and that is to help you live a life that much more free from dysfunction. So today, we're going to talk a little bit about one of those downfalls of dysfunction, those dysfunctional workplaces, and that's burnout. So we're going to talk about how to not only avoid burnout, but if it's kind of bitten you, what are some ways to kind of get back on track? And so to help us with that, I have the wonderful fortune of having a fantastic guest, Elea Faucheron, on. And she is the founder, I'm going to get this right, Elea, founder of Move, Think, Smile. Mm-hmm. And you've written books on this. I mean, this is kind of an area that is an expertise of yours on how do we kind of get back on track and or prevent burnout, which, I mean, who hasn't experienced that in one way, shape, or form? So thank you. Thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So I definitely want to jam on this and get your perspectives and thoughts. Before we jump too far into it, tell us a little bit about what you're up to these days and then how you got here.
So right now I'm actually in the middle of creating an online course for what's in the book, because the book I created is 14 modules. So I like to look at the book as a course, a way to get yourself from burnout into what I call badass, which is just feeling really good. And really this all kind of comes from my own tumultuous burnout and my desire to really get back to a better place, and a combination of sport and self-development. I actually owned and operated a retail store for over 12 years here in Charleston. And we started with kiteboarding, but then we went into surfing and paddleboarding and skateboarding.
Super cool.
Yeah. And so the fascinating thing was I thought, oh, I'm living the dream and I have such a cool business and I'm outside a lot and I'm this or that. And, it's not possible that I could be burnt out. And of course, what I didn't realize was how the stress was kind of compounding on me. And even when you think sometimes you're living the dream, you can still be kind of, you can still be exposed and you can still get knocked down by burnout. And so that was a big learning lesson for me. I really realized, all the different things that kind of came together to sort of make a perfect storm.
Yeah. See, what I love about your story, well, I've used love in an interesting way. So I love about the story that you can teach us a lot, but I know how painful it was. Often when I think of burnout, I immediately think of this like flame that goes shoo, like that. But the way you described it was like this slow burn.
Yes.
And you started to get used to the feeling. And it burned a little more and burn a little more and burn a little more. And it ended up eventually one day you thought, oh my gosh, there's almost nothing left. I'm getting a little burned out here.
Yes, absolutely. And that's one thing I try to really hone in on the book is the difference between stress and burnout, because I think a lot of times we sort of use those interchangeably. But I think if you've experienced the worst of burnout, which I actually have several stages of burnout that I describe, if you're at the worst stage, it's nowhere near like stress. Stress feels like a good day if you're burnt out. And like you said, there's really this big difference of when you're stressed, you have this kind of reserve to really bounce back from whatever is troubling you. So say you have something goes bad in your day and maybe you kind of have a freak out for an hour, but then you kind of get yourself back together and you're like, okay, I'm reset, I'm back on track. But with burnout, you can find yourself getting, stumbling with an obstacle in front of you and then taking days or weeks or months to kind of get yourself feeling good again. So that's the real difference. There's not a lot of reserves in the bank with burnout.
So I got to ask, now that you mentioned it, the 3 stages, because I'm sure there are people watching, listening right now saying, I know I'm burned out to some degree. I hope I'm not like stage 3 burnout.
Yeah. So basically we've got the early flicker. And this is kind of where you're noticing that you're not quite up to snuff, but it's not really enough to stop you in your tracks. You're just kind of like a bad day here, a bad day there, maybe a bad week, but you're like, you still just kind of kick through. Then there's the approaching ignition stage, where this is really like, okay, now physical symptoms and or psychological symptoms like anxiety and depression are starting to happen more frequently. And you're kind of like, okay, something weird is going on here and it's starting to affect my performance and I'm not really sure what to do. And you're kind of in this teeter zone. You're teetering. And then in the big burn, this is where I really see people where you're laid out on the couch, or, you have a major physical or psychological illness that comes upon you, and you realize that, oh my gosh, like I really can't work. I'm not functioning. Like I'm not who I used to be. I don't even recognize myself anymore. And that transition can actually happen really quickly, but the early flicker and approaching ignition, those can actually be going on for years. And that's what I really realized with my situation, is that I had been teetering with burnout for, I would say, over 5 years, but I was still functional. But then I hit a really, really big trigger and roadblock, which my business actually went through a lawsuit. And that trigger was basically the straw that broke the camel's back, right? And it just kind of tumbled me into this really dark place. And that's when I realized how easy it is when you're kind of in that teetering place. If something big or dramatic comes in, like, maybe you have a major shift in your company, or you get laid off, or something kind of major happens, again, you don't have those reserves, and you realize kind of how fragile you actually are.
Yeah. So, okay, great segue then into what do we do? Like, how do we deal with this?
Yeah. So what I realized was that I needed a really simple system to get myself out of this. And what's fascinating is, of course, when you're burnt out, you're really not smart, for a lack of a better word. You're not really functioning at a good level. Your brain is kind of constantly in this fear section of the brain, the amygdala. And so your rationale and your reasoning is not that great. So you want things to just be really simple and easy to do. And what I realized is what I could do is put together a formula from what I started to do to heal myself from burnout. And the 3-step method is called move, think, smile, because these words are just so easy to remember. And the first thing that I really realized I had to do was get myself outside in nature and start considering what sort of bold moves I could make with my body. I really needed to start moving my body again. Now, I was at a pretty high level athletically, but burnout hit me so hard that I lost a lot of my strength. My nervous system got hit. And so kind of had to slowly start building myself up again. But just anytime I would feel that kind of negativity coming in, or that stress coming in, I would actually get up and shift my body. So I would either go out and walk to the mailbox, or I would do 5 push-ups, or I would do a little yoga, even if it only took 3 minutes, just to kind of keep myself from spiraling down into this kind of stressful thought pattern. Then I also realized that moving boldly is about making this commitment to change. So I realized, oh my gosh, I'm in this bad place and I need to get myself out. So I've got to commit. I have to commit to getting myself out, and I've got to be able to make a bold move to say no to these things that are taking me down, which at that point was a lot of thoughts and, of course, the physical manifestation.
Yeah.
And then I realized that I had to start thinking differently. And one thing that really caught my attention it was a bumper sticker that I saw, and it said, "Don't believe everything you think." Again, so simple, but it just struck me like a ton of bricks. And I thought, yeah, I don't have to believe all this kind of negative thinking that's going on in my head. I don't have to believe that my world is crumbling right now. I have to really be careful about what it is that I'm thinking. And I started to realize too, just with my coaching certification, my coaching program, which was kind of happening a little bit simultaneously to this. It was a little bit before, but the power of changing our perspective and how you think really does, affect how you feel. So I said, okay, when I'm in a bad place, I need to remember I need to get up and move and commit. I need to be willing to realize I can change what I'm thinking. Like, I'm not a victim to my thoughts. Yeah. And then I realized that I needed to start smiling a whole lot more. I needed laughter and joy and silliness in my life, like my life depended on it. And I realized how much stress had kind of sucked that part of me out, that kind of playful, more childlike part of me. And I realized I got to start doing more things that I love. And not only that, I've got to start doing things that make me laugh. And so that's when I realized if I could use those 3 words, move, think, and smile, and not always necessarily in that order, but as long as I combined the 3 of those, that I could get myself out of this just horrible feeling place. And I could feel my energy start coming back, and I felt less depleted. And so I realized this isn't rocket science. This is very simple, right? But how often do we just forget to do the simple things when we're really stressed because we're so kind of locked up in that mental pattern of the stress that's happening in our lives and how it's about to crush us and what are we going to do? And so, again, I wanted just something really simple that you could go back to time and time again that always, just like that, got me out of that space.
So I'm going to dig into all 3 of those in a minute and ask some more questions. But just for you, how long did it take you practicing that kind of regimen to one day say, wow, I'm in a different place? I don't feel that same level of burnout or stress that I had felt before.
Yeah, like everything that I found, at least in my life, everything is kind of so gradual that sometimes you just sort of wake up and realize, oh yeah, maybe things have shifted. But what I realized was that for me, it took, I would say, at least a solid year, which that sounds kind of scary because you're like, what? But
I can tell there are people listening right now. They're like, oh, yeah, I was hoping she'd say 3 weeks.
3 weeks, right. And this is where it's really a matter of how far down the rabbit hole you are, right? So if you're in the big burn and you're experiencing very extreme physical symptoms, it could take you a while to get back from there. And that's kind of just the process of being patient to letting your body heal, because stress has an insane effect on your entire biological and cellular system. But what I found is that if people can really start understanding when they're getting ready to kind of go into that tipping point, that applying this method really helps them stop it from getting worse. And what I find is that most people, again, it will vary, but if you really start applying it, it does happen quickly. And you will get back to yourself. You'll get out of that kind of really desperate place pretty quickly. But it may be a longer period before you feel 100%. And what I also noticed is that in the beginning, I had to apply that 3-step method all the time, like every day or even a couple times a day or 10 times a day. But when I started noticing the shift was that when I started having to use it less and less, and also noticing that when I hit an obstacle in my path, that I was able to rebound a lot faster. I was able to get up and kind of brush myself off faster and be like, oh, yeah, okay, I know what to do. Like, okay, I need to, move differently. How can I think about this obstacle differently? And what can I do to kind of make myself happy and smile? Because, of course, when we bring in that component of laughter and play, it really helps tone down that fear center of our brain and turn up the prefrontal cortex, the rational thinking. Plus, it kind of lets our subconscious sort of figure all that craziness out over here and kind of gets us out of the mind that created the problem.
Super cool. Okay, so I want to dig into a few more. I've got questions about all 3 of those, but I've noticed we've just hit the break. So I want to take us into break, and then as soon as we come out, I want to dig into this a little bit more because I'm curious as to how we can even further kind of take from this and make this work for us.
Yes.
So we'll go right into break. So stay tuned. And when we come back, we're going to talk more about how we can use this methodology of move, think, smile, and make our lives that much better. Hey everyone, this is Brandon. I want to take a moment to thank you for listening to my show. We wouldn't have a show without you. In an effort to get you the topics, guests, and resources that'll make your life better, I need your help. Go to theworkplacetherapist.com, www.theworkplacetherapist, all one word, .com. and take the listener survey that's all about you and your needs. We'll be giving away a $50 Amazon gift card to one lucky listener. I look forward to hearing from you. Let's eliminate dysfunction together. So welcome back from break. This is Brandon Smith, and of course, this is the Brandon Smith Show. And today we are talking about burnout. And I've got a wonderful guest, Elea Faucheron, on with us to help talk about this. And Elea, you were sharing this idea of move, think, smile before the break, and your methodology, which is also your book. Which at the end of our time together, I want you to talk about where we can get a copy of that.
Okay.
And I wanted to dig into this a little bit. I want to start with move.
Yes.
So you mentioned the important learning you had was change your body, make big movements. That could be going out to walk to the go get the mail, or it could be doing 3 minutes of yoga. It just change up your body. But then you also said something in there too. It was you hinted at not doing things, saying no to things. What's the right balance of this? Are both equally important in terms of not doing things and doing things?
Yes. So this is the big sort of the big balance point when you're trying to figure out what it is that's going to get you out of burnout. And this is where I try to really stress with people how important it is that they're going to have to figure out what that unique kind of recipe is for them. But if you can start to tune in and notice what depletes your energy and what gives you energy, you can start to really notice where you need to move forward. So sometimes I tell people it's like just as simple as that. If you notice that an activity is really depleting your energy, but you're like, but why? I don't know why. It shouldn't be. It's not a bad activity. Just drop the whole story about it and just don't do that activity for a little while, because you're noticing that it's depleting your energy. And when you're burnt out, everything is about figuring out how can I replenish my energy, because as we said before, it's basically like your bank of energy is not only empty, you're in debt. And you've got to start rebuilding that energy bank. And so you've got to start figuring out what are the things that I can do to really help bolster my energy. And if anything depletes me, I've just got to say no. Even if it's just for the next month, 6 months, you just got to say no.
Here is the really tough question then. I can imagine there are people listening right now and they say, well, Elea, my job is what's depleting my energy.
Yes.
All of it.
Yes, exactly.
So at what point would you recommend that the person either takes a sabbatical or actually quits their job altogether?
Yeah, so one, I'm a huge proponent of sabbaticals if you can do them. And I think, quitting the job is a tough one, because this is a big life transition. And sometimes, again, it goes back to that question of what's going to deplete my energy or what's going to cause me more stress. So sometimes quitting your job might seem like the solution, but it's going to bring your stress levels so high that the best scenario is actually to say, okay, what's a bold move I could make within my job to change what's happening here? Like maybe actually I do have the ability to kick out an hour early or to go in an hour late and talk to my boss or talk to the people that I'm working with on my team. How can I shift the way that I'm working so that it can support me a little bit more, because right now I'm really, really drained. Another thing can be, how can I think about this differently? So a lot of times it's not necessarily the job, but how we're thinking about the job. So really looking in to see, okay, are there ways that I can change my thinking about this scenario? And then what are some ways that I can make this job more fun, right? So a lot of times we sort of get into these patterns with our work and we think there's no other way to do it. When really what we've got to do, again, this goes back to stress has taken your creativity offline. So you got to get your creativity back online and realize, I could start asking more questions. I could talk to my coworkers and my boss and figure out, is there another way? Now, if there's no way to change your work, if there's no way to change your situation, that's where I just really recommend people start doing what they can outside of work to start building that energy back up. Yeah. Again, there's always opportunities and always options. The main thing is to realize that you're not alone in stress and that there's always options, even though your brain will tell you that there are none.
That's a fair point. It's also interesting, too, is I've seen cases where people have quit their job and they've been stressed out. But I've also seen cases where people have quit their job and it's like there's this natural high that overcomes them because they just look so at peace and they're like, I am unemployed. And it
Yes.
feels great.
Yes. Yes.
So
And
it's a good probably reminder for us that you might experience that too. You could quit your job if you're at that point of burnout, and it may be the absolute just release of all of that.
absolutely. And that kind of brings me to this thing of that even though burnout really just feels awful when you're in it and it can be really, really a dark place, the gift in it is that it is telling you that something has got to change. And you have now reached a boundary and a limit. And what I realized for me is I had no idea where my boundaries were. So what stress and burnout did for me is show me where those boundaries were. And now I approach things very differently. But the great thing is that, yeah, sometimes it makes you get to that point where you say, this wealth that is happening in my job is not worth my health. And I'm going to change my career. I'm going to change my job. I'm going to quit, and I'm going to take, 3 months to get myself well again or to get myself back on track. And then I'm going to do the next step. And that's where it really takes a lot of trust, surrender, and will. And that's something that I talk a lot about in the book, is being able to trust the decisions that you're making. Because again, too, burnout can really make you feel like you're in a catch-22, that sense that I was saying before, where it's like, well, if I quit my job, then I don't have my money and I don't have security. So that stresses me out. But then if I stay in my job, then I'm really stressed and I can't do anything about it. And now I'm really stressed, right? So we get into this kind of like black and white thinking that, these are my only two options and I don't have any other choice. And again, that's where it can be really helpful to bring in this 3-step method for yourself, or again, reach out for help. You've got to have, again, somebody else too that can really help you through this process, and mentoring and coaching can really, really help.
Yeah. So having other people help you along. It's funny
Yeah.
hearing you talk. I got to about the end of last year, mid-November, and I thought to myself, I feel burned out.
Yeah.
And, but then I was questioning that because I have a couple days where I'd be depressed, and then I have a couple days where I was really anxious. And
Yeah.
then depressed, and then anxious. And I thought, well, maybe it's depression. Well, maybe it's anxiety. But hearing you talk, no, it was burnout, because it was almost like I was experiencing both sets of those emotions.
Absolutely. And that's, an interesting thing for me too, is that anxiety and depression are a huge symptom of burnout. And, I kind of feel like the job burnout, that word, when you hear it, you really resonate with it if that's where you're at. And I feel like that's just sort of a construct saying, well, you've put too much of your focus on work and not enough on other areas of your life. And of course, your stress management skills aren't working for you. But just really the whole idea of being able to get back to, where you want to be and noticing where you are now, that sometimes takes a harsh moment. Like with me, my burnout and the way it manifested for me physically was like a lot of dizziness, nausea, insomnia, all kinds of stuff. I went to the doctor and thought I had some kind of like rare flu that I just couldn't get over. And he looked at me and said, no, I think you're depressed. And I sat there and with tears rolling down my cheeks, I'm like, what? I'm not depressed. I can't be depressed, right? So I think it's really interesting.
I don't have time for this. I don't have time to be depressed.
I don't have time to be depressed. I don't have time to have anxiety, or like, why is my heart racing? There's no good reason for my heart to be racing. And so, again, that's really interesting to see how not only that outside feedback, but also that those two experiences are very real for people with burnout. And I think it's just really important to realize that it's like, you're not crazy, and that, this too shall pass, and that it's kind of a part of the process. And for me, it was very disorienting, because I just really, again, no good, busy bee, high achiever, driven person wants to admit or feel like that they are having anxiety or depression or burnt out. Because for me, there was a lot of shame in that for me. I thought that meant I wasn't a good business owner, that I didn't know how to handle my stress, which was true. But, I came up with all these judgments on myself of what this meant, that I didn't love my customers, that I didn't, do this, that, the other. And I realized I had to come back and just really have a lot of compassion for myself and realize that wasn't the case. I loved my customers and I loved my job. And A woman said to me actually at one point, she said, in order to burn out, you have to have a burning passion. And when she said that to me, I felt like 100 pounds of weight lifted off of me, because I thought, oh my God, I'm not a bad person. I'm not an unpassionate person. This happened because maybe I was a little overzealous and I didn't really know how to manage all of this.
That's a great way to look at it. I love that. You have to be a passionate person. You have to have a fire in order to burn out. I love that. And I love that you kind of segued into also the thinking part of it too, and how you had to challenge your thinking around that. So, all right, so we're nearing the end here, and I want to have us spend our last few minutes on this topic, painting a picture of what does ideal look like to a certain degree. So if you say to yourself, what are good goals for people to set where this might help them prevent possible burnout? So that could be exercise routines, what you would prescribe in terms of thinking, what that might look like, and even how we can be more intentional about smiling. What would you prescribe?
For me, I love getting people outside and in nature, because I feel like nature, one, is extremely healing, not only mentally but physically, and there's a lot of science behind that as well. And I think getting people to move their bodies in different ways that also requires your brain to think about it as well. So if I could have my ideal way, I would really challenge people to do things like obstacle course racing, where they get outside, they're in the mud, they've got to figure out how to get up over this obstacle physically, which also helps them mentally, which also they can take that experience back into the office or into the boardroom. I really feel like the body can help us really solidify knowledge versus just being intellectual about it, but actually making it like an experiential experience.
So I should sign up for a Tough Mudder? Is that what I should be doing?
So obstacle course, maybe it's obstacle course racing. Maybe it's signing up for a class at the circus gym and learning how to fly through the air. Or maybe it's signing up for a rowing class. Or maybe it is even just going to the gym. I always tell people doing something bold and different is dependent on you. So doing something extreme, you should not compare that to people who do extreme sports, right? So maybe for you, going out and approaching a 3-foot wave is like an extreme experience and something new and different. You don't have to throw yourself into Jaws, right? If it's pushing your limits, then that's a great place for you to be. And I think if we can get our bodies moving, that also helps the way we think about things. If you've ever had a big problem and then gone and done a workout, and then afterwards you come back and you're like, man, why was I thinking that was such a big problem? Or all of a sudden some major insight comes to you. And I feel like this is really important with the smile piece as well. So a lot of times I encourage people to paint, play with clay, play with music, play on bongos, even if you don't know how to play an instrument. That play, again, when you do that, it allows your mind to kind of process information in another space. You get done with that experience and you're like, oh, I see what the answer is now. Or, oh, I can see this from another perspective. I see how to get not over this obstacle, but I can actually get through it by going around and to the side and then back over and around. Does that make sense?
I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it. So challenge yourself both physically, but even in areas of play. Stretch yourself, put yourself in different situations. Fantastic. Yeah. Fantastic. So I ask all my guests this question. What's one life hack you have for us that would help us to live a life a little more free from dysfunction, either personally or professionally?
I think one thing that really helps me is to realize that I don't have to go from a negative space to a positive space in one jump. I used to try to do this all the time. So one thing that I think is really helpful is to take yourself in stages up to a great space. And I feel like that really helps, because when you're in a negative space and someone says, well, just be happy or just turn this around, you just want to shove them in the closet, right?
I was thinking slap them, but yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So my big hack is, how can you do that in stages? How can you kind of take that incrementally? So it might be something, for example, like, I'm really pissed off and I'm feeling really bad right now about this situation. And instead of going, well, I shouldn't, or let me just look at the happy, optimistic side, it could just be, that, what, I'm doing okay right now. And this isn't actually going to make me homeless. and I can get through today, and tomorrow I can probably get through tomorrow as well. And actually this weekend, there's something fun coming up that I'm excited to do. And again, just kind of taking these small steps. And I think with Move, Think, Smile, you can also use that to take your small steps towards getting to this sort of amazing space. And if you can make that jump right away, all the more power to you. But I find, again, if I link this back to sports, if you're feeling really bad, someone says, go out there and, I want you to do the long jump, and I want you to jump from, 0 to 10 feet in one try. It's going to be pretty difficult.
Yeah, no doubt.
So how can you make those small jumps? Because those small jumps done consistently will get you out of a bad space.
So that's a good segue. So if people want to get a copy of your book or learn more about what you're up to, where can they go?
You can either check out our website, which is movethinksmile.com. Easy to remember.
It is easy to remember.
Or just go on to Amazon. The book is on Amazon, and it is available in paperback. It's also available in audio, and it's available as an EPUB. So
fantastic.
Lots of different ways you can digest the information. And like I said, the course is actually got 14 modules in it. So it's actually kind of big. So I'm just going to warn everyone. But I tell people, take it at your own pace. I've written it so that if there's a chapter that really speaks to you, you can jump right into that chapter. You don't have to read it from one end to the other if you don't want to. And again, there's just tons of little tidbits of advice in there to get you out of burnout and into feeling badass.
Awesome. Elea, thank you. Thank you for your time. Thank you for all your insights. This was phenomenal. I feel better already.
Okay, great.
and thank you all for listening and watching. Continue the fight against dysfunction every week on The Brandon Smith Show. And of course, you can check out all of our past content on the Brandon Smith Show website, and just go to theworkplacetherapist.com. So until our next show, have an awesome week and an awesome life.